welcome. My name is Audrey Grazzi. I'm the Director of the Mental Health Resource Division at SBH. Mental Health Resource is a part of SBH that provides a variety of services to both individuals, groups, schools, and shuls. Some of these services include referrals to various mental health professionals, support groups, and workshops on mental health topics. We do trainings on sexual abuse. We also provide to adolescents in schools workshops on healthy relationships. Our newest initiative, which we received very strong and positive feedback about, is our fertility program. We also raise awareness about mental health issues by providing lectures such as this one to the community. Tonight's talk is one of the series of lectures on anxiety that we have seen with much success. Mental Health Resource and Search have collaborated to bring you tonight's lecture. Again, like Bridget said, please take the brochures, and if anybody's interested in hearing more, there's a lot of information in the brochures. So tonight I'm going to present our speaker. I'm very privileged to present Dr. David Rosmarin. He is the assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and the founder and director of the Center for Anxiety. He is a board-certified psychologist, clinical innovator, and prolific researcher who has authored over 50 peer-reviewed publications and 100 abstracts focused on spirituality and mental health. He is also the author of Spirituality, Religion, and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, a guide for clinicians. It's my privilege to welcome Dr. Rosmarin to SBH.
Thank you, Audrey. I really appreciate that warm introduction. It's so nice to be here with an anxious crowd. Sephardic Speaker Poland really does incredible things. I'm grateful for our collaborations over the years. One of my offices is pretty close by on Bedford Avenue and Kings Highway, so we've dealt with a lot of cases together and consulting on programming, and it's really incredible just the work that you're doing to support your community. It's much needed, and it's also done with respect for people's privacy and confidentiality. And it's a beautiful thing. So I'm glad to be a part of it and to be here tonight. So we're speaking about anxiety, and a talk about the subject really couldn't come at a more appropriate time. And I'm not saying because it's Rosh Hashanah coming up and Yom Kippur and we're all like scared. That's not what I'm speaking about. I'm talking about this age that we live in, which is an age or an era of anxiety. I'm going to provide some context and tell you how anxious people are today. So according to the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 1 in 5 adults across this country has a full-blown diagnosable anxiety disorder in every given year. That's a fifth of the country, right? And over the lifetime, it's actually 2 in 5, 40% of adults. Nearly 1 of 4 of those cases are severe. 22.8% of anxiety cases. What that means is that about 1 in 20 Americans in any given year have levels of anxiety that are so high that they are either incapacitated or potentially dangerous to themselves or to other people. 1 in 20. And in New York, it's higher. Among teens, though, it's actually getting worse, both the severity and the prevalence. According to the National Comorbidity Study at Harvard Medical School, 1 in 3 teens today has a diagnosable anxiety disorder. So if you have a classroom of 30 kids, you're talking about 10 who are certifiably anxious. And can you imagine the level of anxiety that has for everybody, the other 20, and the teacher, and the administrator, and everybody else? But the bigger concern than prevalence, and these numbers are astonishing, right? This is why I'm very busy. The bigger concern than prevalence, though, is the severity. There's a lot of data which is suggesting that not only is anxiety essentially ubiquitous, like everybody and their grandma, but it's actually becoming more severe. How many people here have heard of the term NSSI, or non-suicidal self-injury? 2 people, and they're both clinicians. Okay. NSSI or non-suicidal self-injury involves the intentional destruction of body tissue not for culturally sanctioned reasons. So I'm not talking about tattoos or piercings, which I suppose are culturally sanctioned in some degree. I'm talking about cutting, burning, intentional bruising, and the like in order to cope with emotional distress. Last October, some of my colleagues at the Harvard Medical School published a landmark study among college students. This is not among college students who are seeking mental health treatment, not among counseling centers. We are talking about college students, period, okay? Healthy, privileged, educated college students in the United States. 65,000 of them were sampled across 108 campuses throughout the entire country, and 1 in 5 students had reported engaging in NSSI. Nearly 1 in 10 students had reported that they had tried to take their lives at some point. 9% of the sample, healthy college students. The mental health in this country is going off a cliff, right? Run to Israel. Go. Even with all the uncertainty of an election, just get on a plane and leave. But if you can't do that, then, well, we'll keep talking about what to do, as long as you're living here. But, you know, it's not only is anxiety and these related issues, it's not even starting in young adulthood anymore. In 2012, there's a study in the prestigious journal called Pediatrics that reported, get this, that 1 in 15 third grade students in the city of Denver had engaged in NSSI. Third grade, right? Denver is not exactly like, you know, inner city Denver, right? You don't hear about that. The same study, nearly 1 in 5 ninth grade females and 1 in 20 males had reported NSSI. It gets worse. In a more recent study, 2017 by JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the reports, a report there, a prestigious report, indicated that there's been a yearly increase of 8.4% year over year in self-inflicted injury visits to an emergency room. So not just a little bit of scratching or bruising, we're talking about an ER visit, okay? At least a couple of stitches. Suicide, second leading cause of death among individuals 10 to 24. In fact, more young people die today from suicide than from cancer, heart disease, stroke, AIDS, birth defects, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease, all 8 combined in every given year. To quantify that, we're talking 3,000 suicide attempts by high school students in a yearly basis. So in the Jewish world, people often ask me, like, is this the same in the Jewish world? So I have a colleague named Zvi Pirutinsky, who is a very fine researcher and a wonderful friend. And he and I published about 25 studies on mental health matters in our communities. We have found that in general, Jewish individuals who are affiliated with Orthodoxy, people who are traditional, people who are more religious, tend to fare a little bit better than Jewish individuals who are not practicing at all or affiliated with the Orthodox world. However, in a recent study that we did of Jewish individuals in the United States and Canada, about 500 people, Sephardim and Ashkenazim, by the way, 21% of the sample of people who are associated with Orthodoxy broadly were taking some sort of psychiatric medication, so 1 in 5, and about the same number were in therapy. So that's a little better than the general public, but it's still very significant. Okay, who here is shocked by these trends? Only a couple of you? Did you hear me? It's incredible. It's unbelievable what's going on. But the more important thing than them being shocking is that they make no sense. It is completely bizarre. We have fewer reasons to be anxious today than ever. Globally speaking, we're wealthier, we are far more technologically advanced, right? We are more productive, more connected. If you wanted to be in, I don't know, Taiwan within 13 hours from now, you could do it. Just go to JFK, hop a flight, and you're there tomorrow. That's an incredible thing. How many people here have benefited from medical technologies? You all have. Stop and consider, are there any people in your community who don't have indoor plumbing? When's the last time you met somebody who does not have a toilet? Really, do you know anybody, can you think of one adult friend, family member, or business associate who has never been on a plane at all because they can't afford a ticket? Not even like a $50 short haul to Philadelphia. I'm not saying there's nothing to be afraid of, and I'm not saying there's nothing to be upset about in this day and age, but it seems kind of strange that the most privileged people ever to walk planet Earth are the most emotionally disturbed. Isn't that strange? Isn't that odd? But even more bizarre, do you know how many different types of medications we have? There's so many medications available that they're actually divided into categories. Antidepressants, anxiolytics, antipsychotics, stimulants, mood stabilizers, anticonvulsants are commonly used these days, right? That's off the top of my head. And it's not that those medications aren't widely used. Here, show of hands. Kidding. But 50 million prescriptions of Xanax alone were issued in the United States last year. Overall, 25% of Americans are on medication. American adults. 25% of American adults are on medication. So let me ask you this. If so many people are taking psychiatric medications to control their mood states, then why are our mood states so out of control? When's the last time you met somebody who had polio? Have you ever met somebody who had polio? Now, I'm not going to mention the measles, bad example, but really, like, so why, if we have medications for these things, isn't the problem going away? What's going on that's making this world that we live in such a ripe context for the development of emotional instability and high anxiety? And what can we do about it? Any ideas? Yeah, you want to go for it?
No,
We hear the
not
question.
an idea. What I thought the reason why, not an idea. I think that all those things that you listed are reasons why everyone's anxious. The cell phones, you don't have time for the children. There's no air and it's 100 degrees outside. Like all those problems are what causes us to be anxious.
Okay, good. I'm definitely going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, comment in the back, yeah.
So I've read many books on the answer. Unless you're doing it with real therapy and trying to make a difference, it's not going to cure your problem. It's not like you had an infection and you're taking antibiotics and it's going to go away.
It's a great point. I agree. But wouldn't you at least think that anxiety or depression would go down since 25% of the country is on meds? You'd think it would at least take some of the air out of the balloon, right? Make it a little bit easier for us in here. Yeah?
I think that everything today is so easily accessible to us.
And?
So we're just having so much more information. So you're watching the news and you're seeing all the things that are going on. And you're looking at social media.
Definitely a
and you're
factor.
hearing about all the people who died and all the people who are sick and all the people who's got his, like you're just hearing all these things that you wouldn't normally hear if you were, you know.
I think it's definitely a factor. These are really important ideas. Yeah.
I think we have a lot more free time even though we're so technologically advanced. People who were farming and didn't know where their next potato would come from didn't have time to think about all these
They didn't have time to worry.
And now we have all these free time on our hands to think about what could go wrong or, you know, what should be, what we should be doing.
It's a bright group. One more comment. You had something to say.
And I was just gonna say, like, because for the Orthodox Jewish people, they have a lot of, you know, tuition bills and that's really
I would have thought that, but the data seems to say otherwise. The data seems to say that if anything, we're doing marginally better. Not a lot better. It's not a cure, but if anything, it seems to be we have a little bit of a bump. Okay, so I wanted to find some terms here before we move on. There's fear, and then there's stress, and then there's anxiety. Okay, so fear. What's fear? Fear is a natural and healthy reaction to a perceived threat. Have you ever been walking down the street in Manhattan and you see an MTA bus like screaming towards you at 50 miles an hour? Like, ah! You know? That is fear. That's a fight or flight response. And that's actually a good thing. We want you to have a fear response, otherwise you'll get flattened by a bus. Adrenaline, which comes from their home in just above the kidneys, the adrenal glands, that flows right into the bloodstream. It triggers this cascade of physiological changes. People have more oxygen circulating throughout their body, oxygenated blood, increased oxygen intake, muscle tone goes up, people become like really strong all of a sudden. Blood gets diverted from the extremities to the inside, to the vital organ, from the extremities to the vital organs to keep them going. The digestive system slows because you don't need energy, you're trying to protect yourself. And the visual system also changes by pupils dilating so you can have a wider field of vision. All that happens in a nanosecond. So those physiological changes are positive. Fear responses are good. If you don't have a fear response, you probably wouldn't be here. In fact, when babies are born, they're tested for something called the Moro reflex. There are different ways of doing it. Either a loud noise is made, or sometimes the baby is like picked up a little bit and then they fall back. And what the nurses want to see is you want to see the baby putting their arms out and having a startle response. That's a positive thing. If a baby doesn't have a Moro reflex, then the neurologist gets called in. And it's usually kids like that typically don't survive. So what's anxiety then? If fear is a normal, healthy response to a threat, anxiety is who said that? That was great. It's an unhealthy response. It's the same response, but there's no actual threat. There's no actual threat present. It's when people are afraid, even though there's no reason to be afraid. That's the clinical definition of anxiety. Interestingly, when people come to my office, Center for Anxiety, they complain of lots of physical symptoms. They say, my heart's beating so fast, it's so uncomfortable, I can't catch my breath, it's really... I wake up in the morning, I feel like I'm choking, I have muscle tension, oh my god, I'm carrying around this pain in my neck and my back, and I wake up in the morning and I'm, by the time night comes, I just have such a headache and my tension is all over here, and I have this numbness and tingling in my fingers, and I feel like I'm going bananas. Like I don't know what's happening to me. Am I having a heart attack? Like I feel like my toes and my fingers. My stomach's in knots. I'm spending all day in the bathroom. Sometimes I'm dizzy, and like whenever there's light outside, like I'm like really sensitive. Does any of that sound familiar to you? So the heart palpitations are because your cardiovascular system is moving, and the breath and the throat stuff, well, you're trying to get more oxygen in. The muscle tension, because you're building up. Your adrenal glands are firing. And that's saying this is the type of response that you would want when you have a threat. The stomach being upset, same thing. And the dizziness is cool. That's because your pupils are dilating and people feel a little bit woozy because it changes their field of vision. So all of those physical symptoms of anxiety make perfect sense if you have a lion running after you. The problem is when they occur out of the blue for no reason, in social situations, when all of a sudden a dog is running across the street and you're afraid of a dog, or you're stuck in an elevator or whatever. So what it means to not have anxiety is to not have these misfires. And anxiety is a false positive, essentially. It's when you have a response to something that you don't need to respond to. It's an overactive fear system. Does that make sense? Now, part of being human is that you're not perfect. I'm not perfect, no one's perfect, and your adrenal glands at times, especially if you live in this country, are going to misfire. Everybody has some degree of anxiety. A false positive every once in a while, not a big deal. And that doesn't mean a person has an anxiety disorder. It just means that they have a little bit of anxiety. Well, join the club. And just along those lines, anxiety does not mean that a person is broken. It doesn't mean something's wrong. If anything, it means that they have an active fear system, which is actually a positive thing. The problem is that if it happens repeatedly, or if it starts to cause significant distress or impairment, then we need to find ways to get them to be less reactive. Skip a little bit. So let's get back to our question. So why are the most privileged people on earth so likely to not have only fear but also anxiety? And you said some amazing answers before, and some of them I agree with. Yeah, it's a comment.
Oh.
Or a question.
I just feel like we're very privileged, we have the phone, whatever, but I feel like every time we want to look something up, we're like trained to do it so fast that when like then problems in our life happen and we think we have to have the answers so fast as we can Google something, and that's why we're so like we don't even have coping skills anymore,
that
and we
is
can't
exactly
even
what I
like.
was going to say.
Yeah,
Very good question.
sorry.
No, you didn't steal my thunder. It's a
But you
great
say
point.
it better. So.
I don't think so, actually. But I will tell you this, that I believe exactly what you said, that I'm just a little bit differently, is that I don't know for sure why people are so anxious, and I think all of your answers are great. But for me, from the biggest factor, I think, is that we are obsessed with being in control. We are obsessed with knowing things and being in control of things. And the problem is that we're not in control. You're not in control, that's the way life is. I'm not speaking religiously or spiritually here. Yes, there are spiritual correlates of that, ask your local rabbi. That is not my point. My point is, human beings just aren't in control of their lives. There are so many factors that can come out of nowhere and derail your plans on any given day. That's what it means to be human. And we don't like that because we have a culture which is completely obsessed with control. We have predictions for everything. Financial markets, political elections, right? Who hasn't been watching? Flu epidemics, professional sports teams, weather. And how many times are those predictions wrong? Almost always, right? Are the weather, oh, it's going to rain today. It didn't rain. It's not going to rain today. Pouring rain, snow, sleet, hail. What on earth is going on? We would actually prefer to predict the future and be dead wrong than just to admit, I have no clue what's going to happen. That's where we are. We have to know what's going to happen next, even if we actually don't know what's going to happen next. There's another thing, which is that people are very risk averse today. In the 1950s, 22% of this country was in dire poverty. Dire poverty. Today the rate's less than 10%. But there's helicopter parenting, right? We have to know where everybody is, always be in complete control. Oh no, what if? And it's that, the risks are less today than they ever have been. And there's such protection of kids not to have setbacks, not to have failures. There's another way that the cultural need for control comes out. People really don't like to be in pain or to have discomfort today. Over-the-counter analgesics, that's like Tylenol, Advil, aspirin, painkillers. Anybody gonna want to guess how much we spend per year in America on painkillers? Over-the-counter painkillers. I'm not even talking about prescription. It's billions. It's 5.4 billions. That's more than the entire gross national product of the country of Fiji. The whole sovereign nation of Fiji produces less every year than the number of pills, than the amount that we spend on Tylenol, Advil, and aspirin. It's funny, right? People really don't like to have any degree of discomfort, lack of control, lack of knowledge. We are totally obsessed with it. And for anxiety, there's another aspect, which is, firstly, that's going to make us anxious in and of itself. Because anytime you're off kilter, it's like, what's wrong? The answer to that is, it's life. Like, it's called life. It's not always going to be fun. I'll be perfectly honest, right now, I have a bit of a low-grade headache, right? I've been so busy today, I haven't even noticed it. But I'm okay, I don't need Tylenol. That's okay. I'm gonna survive it. I don't think it's like brain cancer, God forbid, or anything like that. Could be, but I don't have control over that either. But the point is that you can learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's not what we teach kids. That's not what we practice today at all. There's another thing though for anxiety. This is important. People are typically allergic today to having anxiety in the first place. We're anxious about having the anxiety. And guess what happens then when you have anxiety? You are anxious about your anxiety, and does that make it worse? Yes. Ta-da! Welcome to my clinic. People have normal mood fluctuations. It's a normal thing to have. Sometimes you're feeling a little tense, and sometimes you're chill, everything's cool. And sometimes you're a little down and not having a great day. And other times you're yeah, let's rock and roll. And that is totally normal. But kind of unpredictable, and people have emotions, and sometimes they're intense, and sometimes they're not what we want them to be. People tell me often that the reason that they cut themselves is because they expect themselves to feel something, and that helps them to feel something. They're expecting themselves to have an emotional response, and oh, finally I got something. But the whole mechanism by which people engage in that is by judging themselves for how they feel in the moment. Sometimes you're going to be bored, and sometimes you're going to be excited. Today we medicalize our mood states. Our first reaction when we have an uncomfortable emotion is, something's wrong, I need to take medication. I have a chemical imbalance and a biological problem. In fact, it's genetic. And there's this completely unrealistic expectation that your emotions are going to be even-keeled and in check all the time. And guess what? Are you a human being? I hope so. So if you're a human being, then your emotions will not be in check all the time. Sometimes they're gonna wax kind of intense, and like, that's okay. Emotions don't kill people. The response to the emotion may kill them, but the emotion in and of itself never killed anybody. So part of what we teach people with anxiety is not only to accept their life circumstances, but actually to learn to accept how they feel. Can you just accept being uncomfortable or being anxious? And not to fight it. When the emotion gets really, really intense and you want to like crawl out of your skin, just don't fight it. Just willing hands. Just let go. And let it wash over you. When people let go, it's uncomfortable because you're not fighting it anymore. But it goes away quicker than if you keep up the fight. You try to control negative emotions, they just keep fighting back at you. But if you let go, let it happen, it'll stop as soon as it stops. There's another point. Socially, we tend to judge people as being broken if they are or disordered when they struggle with certain emotions. I was doing some consulting in Washington, D.C. recently for a group called SAMHSA. It's a Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. It's part of some government body. I think it's part of SSH. What's that? Social and Human Services, SHH, whatever it is. It's in D.C. So mental disorders there are known as the no casserole disease. The no casserole disease. Anyone want to take a guess why they call depression the no casserole disease? No casserole like no lasagna, right? When people, God forbid, get cancer, when they have surgery, then everyone brings over dinner. Meal train, Mazal tov, baby, like let's bring over food, like let's take care of the person, let's buy them stuff. What happens when somebody has depression? I don't want to go there. Instead of embracing people when they need us, there's this and I think that response of shunning people is actually because it reminds us that we're not in control of our own emotions, and that's very hard to accept. So we stay away from it because it's easier to just avoid it. Okay, so if I'm right, what's the way to thrive? How do we thrive? How do we survive in the age of anxiety? So I believe that the root of anxiety is obsession with control. So then the solution is giving up control, accepting that you're not in control. Giving up. Anxiety gets worse when we fight it, and it gets better when we accept it. If you stop fighting anxiety, it goes away. It's really that simple, typically. The number one piece of advice, therefore, I can give to people who need help with anxiety is to face your fears. Facing fears is the key ingredient in a treatment we use called exposure therapy. How many people here have heard of exposure therapy? Okay, about 50%. Well, the rest will hear about it now. Exposure therapy is a variant of cognitive behavioral therapy. It involves people, exposing themselves to things that make them anxious. We help people to overcome their distress by systematically confronting their fears head-on over and over and over again. As a practitioner, it is so much fun. I torture people all day. I'm kidding. I help people to stare down their worst fears and to become brave every day. The sadistic part of me has a little bit of fun sometimes, but no, I'm kidding. I try to help people to overcome and to be brave in situations that they feel that they cannot handle. But people can handle it. When we stare our worst fears down, we accept that we're not in control. Maybe something terrible will happen. We accept pain, and we accept discomfort, and everybody wins. Doesn't that sound great? It doesn't? It's easier said than done, that's true, but I'll give you a couple of examples. A couple years ago, I had a rabbi friend, who's still a rabbi friend, and he confided in me, he said, I have a terrible fear of heights. So he said, what do I do? So I said, okay, I want you to go up to the highest point you can possibly think of, somewhere with a straight view, straight down, hundreds of feet, and I want you to peer over the edge, and as long as it takes until your anxiety just goes away. So he looked at me and he said, you are insane. There's no way I'm going to do that. I'm going to vomit, I'm going to faint, I'm not going to be able to handle it, maybe I'll jump. What if I have a panic attack? What if you have to call the paramedics? You know, what if I embarrass myself? What if I can't even, lose control of my bladder? I'm like, yeah, all of that's possible. I hope the jumping part doesn't happen, but all of that's possible. And then what? He's like, you're crazy, I'm not doing that. So I said, listen, okay, you don't have to do it, but if you ever want to overcome your fear of heights, then that's what you have to do. That's the only reliable method that I know of in order to help you. And furthermore, I said, if you panic, or if you feel like you just can't control, then just let go. Just let the panic happen. Let it wash over you, be really uncomfortable, let it happen. It might take 30 minutes to pass, but it's probably not going to be longer than that. Maybe 40 minutes max. It's not going to be fun. And don't fight it. So he said, you're nuts, I'm never calling you again. A year later he called me up though, and he said, actually it was an email, and he said he had just gone to a trip to San Francisco, and he took an opportunity to face his fears. He went over the Golden Gate Bridge on foot, and he was looking over the rail the entire time. There are certain places where you can really peer over there, and he took the opportunity, like leaning over. He felt himself getting dizzy, felt himself starting to panic, his dry mouth. He was like completely plotzing and freaking out. Unfortunately, I didn't get a video of it, which was awesome. But at the end, when he got to the end and walked over the bridge into Sausalito, he had this wonderful sense of calm. Why? Because he wasn't on the bridge anymore. No, I'm kidding. Because he faced his fear. He had overcome it. He stood up to his anxiety. He had conquered it. And he said, you know what, I'm not going to let these emotions control me. I'm going to stand up to them. And like, no matter what happens, that's just what it's going to be. I see your hand going up.
So you're talking about anxiety about a situation, like fear of heights or
Yep.
fear of a specific thing. But people have anxiety as a constant. Like people have anxiety about how they're going to provide a living for their family.
Worry wards. People who worry about everything.
Right. So that's
Great.
a constant thing. You can't just face,
Maybe you can.
like, specifically, it's a day-to-day thing.
Maybe you can. Maybe you can face worry. I'll tell you how that works. Let me tell you one more specific example first, and then we'll come to worry. You're right, by the way, that exposure therapy for worry is harder to do, but it's not impossible. You just have to be a little bit clever about it. And you have to have patients who are more willing and more insightful. But it's not impossible, and I'll explain it. But I'll tell you about an OCD case first, and then we can come to worry. I saw a single female in her late 20s, came to me, significant OCD. She literally could not leave her house. Homebound with obsessive compulsive disorder, except maybe to come to my office, and even that, schwitzing. Like she was completely like a mess, like makeup everywhere. Like it was just coming to my office was an ordeal for her. She had unrelenting obsessions and fears, worries in some ways, that she might have a brain aneurysm. She thought she had an aneurysm in her brain, it could pop, and then she would have hemorrhaging and bleed to death and internally, and that would be bad. She didn't want that. So, understandably, so she had very high levels of tension, and then she thought, my tension's getting high, maybe my aneurysm's going to burst. So anytime she got anxious, she got really anxious. And yes, she had been to neurologists, and guess what? There was no aneurysm. Of course, she has this in her mind. And by the way, part of her, she even recognized, she's like, I know that this makes no sense, but I can't shake it. It's making me bananas. The last time she was in a supermarket, she noticed she was feeling a little bit of the anxiety, like by the dairy aisle, like where the milk is and the eggs. She had not gone back there in 2 years. 2 years, never going to pomegranate. She could not tolerate that uncertainty that she might die. She had tons of compulsions, washing her hands, because she might have tuma on her hands, and that would get into her, and that would make her sick, right? The religious aspects of it was really interesting. When she would go to bed, where she would go to bed, where she would eat. She mapped out, like kissing mezuzah, like she was all, like anything religious to protect her body, she did it. We mapped out 70 different compulsions that she was engaging in on a weekly basis, 70. And I said to her, listen, I'm going to work with you, but I'm going to push you hard in treatment. You are going to hate me. Like you are going, if you say yes to working with me, you will regret it, I promise. And she did, and she almost killed me a couple points. But I pushed her so hard in treatment because she was willing to do it. I helped her to face every single one of her fears, every single one of them, with no relaxation techniques. I was not helping her chill out. I was helping her to become more anxious, not less. No avoidances. It's very interesting on the religious side of things. We worked with her Rav, to her rabbi, to understand like what are the parameters of halacha versus her anxiety. That's a whole other schmooze, but that was a lot of fun actually, very interesting. She embraced every single day the possibility that her head might explode. And she really thought at some point, maybe her head is going to explode. She said it was the hardest thing she ever did, and it took about a year. I mean, I don't know how many times I saw her, sometimes twice a week, for a good year. And in the end, literally OCD free, and she's a rock of a person. Just got an email from her. No, I knew she was married. I was actually at her wedding, but just had a second baby. Baruch Hashem, she's really doing well. Yeah, thank God. She's an amazing story. In other cases where people have chronic worry,
Wait, excuse me, how
Yeah.
does she face it?
how does she face her fear?
Of her head exploding.
Of her head exploding? About people who all of a sudden had an aneurysm and just dropped dead. It freaked her out. Oh my God! We saw videos like there are all these videos of news stories about somebody like this like wonderful family and everything, and all of a sudden like bam. And I'm like, it could happen, right? Could. I know it's not fair, right? We actually watched neurosurgery online. We watched like an image, like videos of people like going in to like remove an aneurysm and actually what it looks like. There's so much great information online. She was very concerned at one point that not only would she have an aneurysm, she thought, I'm going to get so anxious that I'm going to kill myself. I determined that it was OCD and not really, you know. So we just did everything we possibly could to freak her out. Like my job in a 90-minute session was just get this girl as anxious as I possibly can. Just turn it up to a 12 out of 10. She literally thought she was going to floss. And she just let it ride. She learned, I don't care how anxious I am, even if it's really, really, really intense. I'm just going to face it. I'm just going to live with it. And bit by bit, she got through it. Hands are going up all over the place. How about you? I haven't heard from you.
Yeah, I just feel like I watch the news all the time, and that's what brings on anxiety. But the way you make it sound is like we should kind of be desensitized to the point of not worrying about things. You expose her to all these kind of.
So with worry, it's tricky, and that's where the news comes in. People often like, well, what if, what if, what if? So that's actually my next point over here. Sometimes watching the news is good, and sometimes watching the news is not. And it depends on what function it is serving for the person who is anxious. This is already like a fine point, but I think it's an important one, and you're a smart group, so I'm happy to talk about it. I'll tell you about worrying first, and then we'll try to get to it. When people have chronic worry, we encourage them to worry more. I want people to worry more intensely. One of the models of worry is pretty interesting, that people say, well, what if this happens, and what if that happens? And they have a level of anxiety, but it's usually like low to medium. When people are worrying, they're usually like at a medium level of anxiety, not like a, you know? In fact, the reason why people worry in many ways is to keep their anxieties low. They're going over and over and over and over again small worries and not actually answering the question. People say, well, what if I get sick? What if I get sick? And they don't actually answer the question like, well, what actually if you did get cancer, God forbid? Like, what would happen? What would it look like being in a hospital bed with your family? It's terrifying. It's actually palpably terrifying. And it's important for people to be able to go there in their mind. Not all the time. Not all the time. Don't make yourselves crazy. But it's important to be able to go there for a couple of minutes at will. And that's what we do with people who worry. We get them to go down in exquisite detail. Really, what are they worried about? And to focus on that for like 3 to 5 minutes a day. 180 to 240 seconds, whatever, 6 minutes. Sometimes we make recordings of them or of other people speaking out their worst fears, and then like we'll put it on their iPhone, and then they'll listen to that. So sometimes if you're watching the news, it's making you worry just a little bit. I want you to worry a lot. So I would cherry pick really scary news recordings and have them watch those for 3 to 5 minutes a day. The rest of the time you can just watch the regular news. Does that make sense?
Why?
The reason why is because we're not in control. That's the reality. Is that I don't know whether I'm going to make it home tonight. I really don't. I hope I do. I have no reason to think I won't, but I really don't know whether I will. That's the reality of being a human being. We are not in control. And can we accept that? The more we can accept that, the less anxious we're going to be. We can't accept that today because technology is so fast and everything's coming at us and we have such incredible conveniences in our lives. Like I said, if you wanted to be in Taiwan tomorrow, you could be there. And we're so used to things being comfortable and things being convenient and things working out that we actually forget the fact that we aren't at the wheel of the car. It's not our plane to fly. We're passengers on this plane. And I think by thinking even for a moment every day, wow, that could be really terrible, we get to a place of humility, but more than that, of acceptance that we're not in control, and we learn to be okay with that. That's what I'm trying to teach my patients, is to be okay with the fact that you are not in control. Lots of points and questions, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about how you work with parents that are dealing with anxiety related to their...
Parents who have their own anxiety or their kids' anxiety?
No, who are having anxiety about their kids.
Okay, well first I'll just mention that I've never seen an anxious child who did not have at least one anxious parent. Ever.
So it's hereditary.
It's not hereditary, it's more complicated. It's contagious, very funny.
It's a reflection of how we act around them.
It's that people learn a lot of behaviors. That they get modeled. Mom sees a spider. Ah! The kid sees a spider. Ah! That's just what mom did. It's like that's just how it goes. But there's more to it. I'm not saying it's always the parent's fault. There's more to it than that as well. But typically it does run in families. When parents have children who are anxious, it's tricky because you don't want to be the bad cop all the time. But at the same time, letting kids off when they're anxious, like we've seen kids who have OCD and they will not touch the car door. So mom or another sibling opens it for them so that way everybody gets to school on time. So listen, for a week or two, maybe we'll put up with that, but that needs to go. The kid needs to be able to open the door and get in and then they get a lot of praise, great, you did it, amazing, you opened the door, and that must have been so hard for you. So we want to validate and give them lots of praise for facing their fears. Often parents will why aren't you opening the door? What's wrong with you? I don't understand, and that just makes them more tense. So it's important to validate somebody's fears and to say I get it, you have panic disorder, you have OCD, this is hard. And therefore, when you face your fears, you're being brave. And to hold their hand through it. That's a general principle about it. Water? I'll have after. Thank you. Do you have an eyeball? Claire? A little bit.
I was just questioning as far as having anxiety about not having an anxious child.
Anxiety about the kids?
About the children.
Yeah.
About the kids? Great. What are you worried about? Don't answer it. But whatever it is, write down the worst possible case scenario and think about it for 30 seconds a day.
So you take it all the way to the extreme and then you work with that.
I would take it all the way to extreme and work with it. Yeah, we're going to push you. Listen, of all the therapists in my office, I actually am not even seeing people in New York anymore, but I'm definitely on the tough side. There are people who are a little bit gentler in my office, but those are usually the newbies. After about 6 months, they're really,
Do you ever go into reasons behind, or you focus on the CBT model of just what's happening now?
It's an important question. Does it matter why a person's anxious, or does it only matter what you do in order to get out of it? I don't think it matters why a person is anxious, usually. Now, there are exceptions. But typically speaking, listen, once a person's conquered their fears, then we can talk about reasons. Conquer your fears first, let's stop panicking, let's stop worrying, and then we can go back and do a whole analysis of every reason in the book why you were anxious in the first place. But until until you conquer it, it's basically an avoidance strategy. The reason why people love to just talk about their mom and their dad and stuff in therapy, who they are, is because they don't want to face their fears, right? It's negatively reinforced. So let's push you through it. Let's get it done, and then we'll start to go.
The underlying premise that once you face it, you realize that it's highly unlikely to happen, therefore deal with it?
Good point.
That's what the underlying premise is?
Okay, yeah, is the underlying premise that
People get an aneurysm, so therefore...
is the underlying premise that you learn that it's unlikely for your fears to happen? That's part of it. The other option is that you can live with the consequences. Sometimes we have people who are socially anxious give a talk in front of a group. And the talk does not go well. They have clammy hands, they stammer, and you know what they realize? Nobody cares. So it's not that their fears were unfounded. Their fears were correct. They gave a bad talk. But it doesn't matter. Like, so you gave a bad talk, like, it's okay, it happens. You can live through it. You hear? So it's not necessarily the, yeah, that was the point. In fact, that's what we do for social anxiety and shyness, people facing their fears. We have people approach strangers to ask them to introduce themselves. Sometimes people are so terrified, like I can't ask anybody for the time, can't ask anybody for their name. Sometimes we have people to do moderately embarrassing things, like they wear their shirt on backwards, like with a tag out, and they'll walk around the street. How many people do you think notice? Nobody notices. Sometimes people are afraid of disappointing other people, so we'll have them, when the light turns green, we'll have them stay put and they won't go until they get honked a couple of times. That's a fun one. Sometimes we'll have them pay at a Starbucks in nickels. Now, I wouldn't do that during the rush hour in certain areas of Manhattan because people will kill you, in which case it's fear and not anxiety. But those are the ideas. People have panic disorder. Panic disorder, those really all of a sudden onset of lots of physical symptoms, right? Like very, very intense. Well, guess what we do? We get them to panic in our room. And we have these little straws, they're like coffee straws. They're 2 millimeters across or 3 millimeters across. They are hard to breathe through. Once I did it for 4 minutes while driving, and I really felt lightheaded by the end of that. But you put it in your mouth, plug your nose, and try to do it even for 30 seconds, 60 seconds. And we get them up to 2 minutes. And they really it actually feels like not enough air is getting into your lungs and you are going to die. It's genuinely scary, but you know intellectually that I'm not going to die, I can breathe through this tube, it's just going to be really uncomfortable. It's a great exercise. In fact, I should have brought straws and had everybody here do it. That was an oversight. My apologies. Okay, a couple more points and questions. Yeah, in the back, there's a lot.
How can you solve these anxieties without being in a clinical office or therapy, where I find that if I face the fear, that's my moment of anxiety, where I think of the worst case scenario, and that's when I feel like I have anxiety, but you're saying to keep doing that, so I'm kind of running around in circles here.
Yeah, so how do you face your fears without help? Technically speaking, you could take all these strategies and do them yourself. This is the open source code for my clinic. So you have it, go to it, and many people will in this room face their fears, find ways to help their children face their fears, or face their fears around their kids, or whatever it is. But sometimes it's hard to figure out exactly what the exposure is to do. Like, there is a little bit of a chokhmah, like there's like a, you have to kind of figure out what exactly is a person anxious about. Sometimes people are so anxious that they can't really figure out exactly what's the focus of it. So sometimes having 1 or 2 sessions just to figure out where to go with their exposures and then to do it themselves, that's enough. People don't need to be in long-term therapy, by the way. Like sometimes people come for 1 session and they're done. For panic disorder, actually, that's fairly common. People will come in for panic. They simply learn that having panic in of itself is not dangerous. They're encouraged to face their panic symptoms, and they never come back again. It's actually very common. The 1 session treatment for panic, it's known. So it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out therapy process. Sometimes a single consultation is great, and we love to see that in our office. That's perfect. Yeah, in the back row.
So, I have a son who's anxious. What do you do for kids, let's say, who have the anxiety for fears that they see actually happen? All of these things that we're talking about, worst case scenarios, and they do happen. And then you have those kids that see it and say, wait a minute, this could happen to me. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, the truth is they're right. This could happen to them. And it could happen to the people that they love. That's reality. The question is, can we accept that? And helping a child to accept that has to be at their developmental level. So how do you do that as a parent? Modeling that you're doing it yourself. Reinforcing positive behavior when the child faces their fears or realizes that they're not in control. Planting messages by talking about these concepts and helping them to understand it. And potentially with professional support by having professionals come in, because it's hard to manage. Sometimes people need a consultation, and usually for kids, it's really not rocket science. You know, I actually wish we saw more kids. We see a lot of kids. Probably 20% of the practice, it used to be a little bit more, in Brooklyn anyway, is kids. But I wish we saw more because I think we could prevent a lot. Sometimes kids have a couple of fears and they're a little bit stuck. Well, take care of it then. You know, I wish I was in the business of prevention. I'm in the business of treatment. Prevention's a lot easier. I'll just say one more thing about that. The American Dental Association recommends that you go to the dentist how many times a year?
Twice.
Right. The American Psychological Association, how many times are you supposed to go to a psychologist a year? There's no recommendations. What's with that? So we take our teeth more seriously than our minds? Really? Like, I don't see why everybody at all in the whole world shouldn't be at least checking in with a professional consultant.
Our parents never do it, our grandparents never.
There's a stigma about mental health.
My great-grandparents didn't go to the dentist either. You know, that's
stigma.
You said there's a stigma.
That's what we're trying to do.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. I understand. And I'm being a little bit flip.
We're trying to make mental health awareness.
But that's where we're coming to as a nation.
It's very different.
I think that's where we're getting to a point where that people do need to have 2 visits to the psychologist a year, and maybe more than that. Like just like the dentist, if you let it go, then you need a root canal. You're going to have to go more than twice a year. It's the same thing with a shrink. And there is this stigma, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be. 20% of American adults having an anxiety disorder in every year, 40% over the lifetime, 1/3 of children, 20% of college students, you know, engaging in self-injury. You know, Harvard, just this week, Harvard College had a suicide on campus. I mean, when are we going to stop, you know, having stigma and actually dealing with what we have to deal with? Okay, a couple more comments. The name of my program is the Center for Anxiety. Okay, so when I developed my clinics, a lot of people said, well, why don't you have it like Center for Anxiety Relief? Or like Center for Anxiety Help, or Center for Anxiety Treatment? So now you know the answer. Because when you come to my office,
You get anxious.
you're going to get more anxious. Okay, I'm going to conclude as follows. With a bit of a Torah thought. After all, I do study spirituality. So, if you look at Sifrei Chazal or Musar, Chassidut, Chachamim from the ages about how to cope with anxiety, typically there's one theme that comes up over and over again. Anybody know what that is?
Prayer?
Well, prayer is a belief, and that does inculcate this theme. The theme is emunah. The theme is faith. The theme is faith in God. So it's no accident to me that clinical science is pointing to the exact same point, which is give up control. Stop trying to fly the plane. Be a passenger. Don't be the pilot. By the way, don't you want to be a passenger? Who wants to fly the plane? Really, like, hi, this is Delta Flight 5073, and the passenger in seat 17A is going to be flying the plane today. How comfortable would you be? Like, I'm very happy to sit in my seat and let a pro fly the plane. Part and parcel of having faith in Hashem is giving up. Bless you. God should bless you, everything should go well. To put it bluntly, either you're in control or God's in control. And if it's us, then well, we have a lot to be anxious about because I'm definitely not the right person for that job. And if we recognize, not just intellectually in our minds, but in our hearts, that we're not in control, that's what really ultimately what Emunah is about. And the reality is, we don't need to know what's going to happen next. We don't even need to be right all the time, and we definitely don't. We don't even need to be calm all the time, and we certainly don't have to be right, and we certainly don't have to be in control. What we have to do is accept that we are not in control. We are not always in the know, and it's not just a psychological message. I think it's a spiritual message, and one which is kind of well timed with us going into Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, if we want to thrive in the age of anxiety, I think there's only one solution, which is let go of control, and have emuna. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm happy to take a couple of questions. We can definitely discuss for a little bit more. Yes?
At what age, like what signs do we look for in our children to see that if they're anxious child? What age or what signs do we see?
Are you anxious about your kids? I'm kidding. At what are the appropriate developmental indicators of anxiety or lack of anxiety? Okay, if your kids are anxious, they're going to let you know. So you're going to see indicators that are a problem. They're either avoiding certain situations. They might seclude themselves and not be overly social.
Isn't that a bunch of other things also, like sensory or that? Like
It could be, and it's important to just look into it. The truth is, if it's anxiety, it's a good thing because it's actually the easiest thing to treat.
Really?
This is not rocket science, right? This is actually a very simple solution. You just help the person to face their fear. If it's more sensory stuff, that's actually more complicated. So I'm kind of hoping that, in some cases that when a kid has an issue, it's more anxious. Sometimes kids at a certain age will start to tell you, I'm worried about this, I'm scared about that. Those are good indicators. It's important to have a relationship with your kids that they can talk to you about what they're upset about. Some parents, they're so scared that their kids might be anxious that every time the child starts to talk to them about their anxiety, they freak out and then the kid doesn't want to talk. So it's important to have those open dialogues and just non-judgmentally ask your kid, like, what's going on? Notice you seem a little bit tense. I'm concerned about something. What's cooking, little guy or girl? Yeah.
Okay, 2 questions. One, what if you have someone that has all different types of anxiety, panic attacks, social anxiety? Is all of it pretty much conquer the fear of each specific one, or when they have all different types of anxiety, how do you deal with that?
Yeah. How do you deal with comorbidities or multiple anxiety disorders? Also, sometimes people have anxiety disorders and depression, or anxiety disorders and substance use. That's hard. That latter one is hard. Because when people are using alcohol or substances in order to cope with their anxiety, first you have to get them off of the substances, and then you have to still deal with the whole anxiety disorder. And they're usually more sensitive to the anxiety because they've been medicating themselves using substances. So those are complicated. With depression, it's also hard, because a person has to feel up, hopeful, engaged. They have to be able to get to treatment. When a person has multiple anxiety disorders, it's actually comparatively easy versus those other two, because it's the same concept. It's just, this is for your panic and this is for your OCD. This is for your social phobia and this is for your worry. By the way, sometimes the anxiety disorders are related. Sometimes people will have panic and then they're worried about the social consequences of having panic. I really don't want people to see me flushed, because then they're going to think that I'm weak and then they're not going to like that. So it's both the social apprehension of what are people going to judge me, plus the fact that they're having panic disorder. So then what would you do if you're the doctor?
Put them in a situation where they are
you get them like really hot and flushed. You put them under like a heat, something like really hot for like 20 minutes, and then you send them out like really hot and flushed and flustered, and with any luck, they'll be panicking also.
Okay, just one more question. When is it when you think it's not working and you have to do medication?
Yeah, medication, I didn't mention. Okay, so medication is a bit of a double-edged sword, because when it comes to anxiety, on the one hand, some people are genuinely too anxious to engage in therapy. Okay? So if a person cannot handle the intensity of any exposures, or they can't come to sessions, sometimes some people some patients are so anxious they can't get out the door. So then for sure I'm going to help them to access medications and encourage that in order to get them moving along, and then we'll hopefully taper them off. The problem with medication is when it's used as a solution to anxiety, because you're basically teaching yourself, I can't cope with this, my emotions are I should be afraid of my emotions, something's wrong with me, and other ideas like that. And I think when it comes to anxiety, those messages can be negative. So it's a double-edged sword, and it really depends where the patient is holding. I'm not against pharmacology and medication, but I do think that we have to be clear about the message that this is a tool to help you face your fear, not this is a solution to your problem. You hear what I'm saying?